This is Bruno Sammartino, and you're listening to InYourHeadOnline.com.
All right, we're back. Welcome to In Your Head Wrestling Radio. I'm the Internet icon, Jackie Jones, along with my right-hand man.
1 inch biceps, the power goat. Bah.
Thanks.
How about that?
It wasn't too bad. And right off the bat, we have one of my favorite wrestlers. When I was growing up, always put a smile on my face. We have George, the Animal Steele, with us.
So let me ask you a question.
Mm-hmm.
How old are you?
I'm 36.
36. So you're talking about the cartoon character.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. I got to get that straight because there's three of us using this body.
Right. I was actually going to kind of start off asking about that. When you really think about like your career, do you consider yourself like the old like vicious heel, or do you consider yourself the cuddly cartoon character, or do you consider it all of it?
Well, honestly, the business changed so many different ways. I started off as a wild, brawling heel, and that's really what I'm all about. As the business changed, and it's still changing as we talk, it became more desirable to be a cartoon character.
Uh-huh.
So, I like being the animal, the wild animal, the vicious heel. But as the business went around, I handled being a cartoon character just fine.
Mm-hmm. Now, how many years did you play, the cartoon character, compared to your whole career?
I started with the cartoon character in 1984. 84, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Prior to that, when I first came to the WWF at the time, actually the WWF was in 1968. And Bruno was the champion, and the first place I really hit it off was in the Boston Gardens.
Mm-hmm.
And the reason for that, they used to play the national anthem before the main event. I didn't know that. Usually in most shows they'd play it, at the beginning of the show.
Mm-hmm.
So I go out and they start playing the national anthem, and Bruno's standing across the corner from me, and the flag's across the corner from me. So he's got his back to me with his hand flag. What am I going to do?
Uh-huh.
So I jumped him and almost started a riot. When I went back to the dressing room afterwards, everybody, all the guys, everybody, management, everybody was really angry. They're screaming at me, "What are you doing, jumping him during the national anthem?" I said, "What's he doing, turning his back on a wild guy during the match?"
Uh-huh.
And so from then on, they started playing the national anthem at the beginning of the show in the Boston Gardens.
Uh-huh. Now, I really got into wrestling because my grandfather was a huge wrestling fan, and one of his favorites was Bruno Sammartino. And just, what was it, like being in the ring with somebody? You're a big heel, he's like huge baby face. Like, what's like that atmosphere like?
Well, Bruno was beyond just being a champion or a baby face. He took it to a whole other level. First of all, in the Boston Gardens, Madison Square Gardens, and Ever Major Arena, it was actually filled with Italians. I mean, it was a ethnic thing. So he was like a living god to those folks. So it was very easy to get heat. It was very easy to stay on him, and he was a great worker, and I think one of the great champions, for that time.
Mm-hmm. Now, we've had Bruno on a few times, and I always think he's one of our best interviews.
Oh, sure.
But there's a lot of people that really like. They always say he's bitter. And I don't really think that. I think people just take little things he says. But what are your thoughts on that?
Well, Bruno's not bitter. In a way, he is, I guess. Let's just be honest about everything. The business changed. It's not the same business that he was in.
Mm-hmm. And
he loved the business that he was in, and it doesn't exist anymore. So, that breaks his heart a little bit, and then he gets a little bit angry about that. Personally, this isn't the same business that I started in at all, period. But it's a great business, and I'm not bitter at anybody about it. I know a lot of people, when they're real hard wrestling fans in the 80s and 90s, they criticize the heck out of me because of the cartoon character.
All right.
Do I care? No. Back when I was a heel and Bruno was a baby face and the champion, they criticized me for being a brawling heel. Do I care? No. It's a business, and wrestling is like hot dogs. So some people like it with plain, some like it with mustard and ketchup, or relish, some like beans on it. Who knows? That's wrestling. Whatever they want, it's up to them.
Yeah.
People ask me all the time, who's the greatest champion you ever worked with? Well, in his time, Bruno. No question about it. In fact, in my mind, he's probably one of the very greatest champions of all time. Some of the champions later on, in my opinion, were almost like cartoon characters. You look at Bobby Backlund. He was a great champion. People make fun of him because he wasn't loaded with charisma, but the guy could wrestle. You know, what an idea that is, being able to wrestle and be called a wrestling champion. Mm-hmm. Pedro Morales had more heat than you could, with the Spanish people. Again, it was bringing out his folks, and they would fill the arenas. And then later on, Hulk Hogan. I mean, I'm the only guy that wrestled Bruno, Pedro Morales, Bobby Backlund, and Hulk Hogan through the WWF. No one else ever lasted that long with all four of those champions. In between, they had a couple of heel champions, and I was on the cards with some of them. Superstar Billy Graham, he was ahead of his time really, but he was a great one. But to stretch that far in between, I'm the one that's seen most of the changes in the wrestling business. Mm-hmm. So people want to get, George, this and George. They don't have a clue what they're talking about because this business has been around a long time.
Mm-hmm. Now, even though those guys would have been all different kinds of champions, it's kind of the same kind of idea where it was the top, like, unbeatable babyface, and they would feed them different heels. But how would you compare those four guys?
Well, to compare them, I got to compare the business. Back when Bruno was champion, we wrestled in only the Northeast. Mm-hmm. We wrestled in every venue, major venue. I'm talking to Boston Gardens, Madison Square Gardens, and back then it was the Philadelphia Arena before the Spectrum, and the Pittsburgh Civic Center, and the one in Baltimore. I can't think of the name of it now. It's still there. We wrestled them every 3 weeks, and we packed houses every 3 weeks. It was a totally different business. You understand what I'm talking about?
Yeah.
Now, how many times do they go to the Madison Square Gardens or the Boston Gardens? 3 times a year?
Mm-hmm. At the most.
Okay, so you see, we're talking a totally different business. So when we start talking about who is the best, I think we got to put it in line of what was going on at the time. Mm-hmm. Tickets sold in Bruno's era probably somewhere around $5, $7, and $12.
Right.
Ticket sales has a little bit to do with it. But again, back then, $10 was worth more than $100 probably now. Mm-hmm. So you got to look at that. Then you look at Pedro Morales. He followed the same program as Bruno did, and they had very weak cards. What drew back then usually was the main event, whoever the champion was working with, and somebody else on the card that was coming up. I wrestled Ivan Putski or Jay Strongbow. The rest of the card would be fairly weak. Later on, when Bobby Backlund became champion, another to me was a great champion. The cards were much stronger. Rather than having 6 or 7 matches and two of them pretty strong matches the rest week, they'd have Andre the Giant on the card. They'd have maybe Bruno Sammartino coming back or whatever. They had stronger cards. They had guys like Don Morocco and all these guys fill the card. Those weren't available for Bruno and Pedro. So Bobby had stronger cards. Does that mean he needed more help? No. It meant the business was changing. And then in Hulk Hogan, my God, we were doing TV all over the country. And we were doing business all over the country. So was he more well-known? Yes. Did he have more charisma? He had a lot of charisma. So did Bruno. So did Pedro. Bobby didn't have a lot of charisma, but he had a lot of hard work and work ethics and so on. So how do you rate them? They're totally different businesses.
Yeah.
And I go and I look at the guys today. They're great performers. It's a TV-oriented business. It used to be that we did our business did our promotion on TV and made our money in the arenas. Now they make their money on TV. It's a totally different business. So the only thing that stays the same is the name wrestling. Mm-hmm. So how do you evaluate that? I don't know if you can. I know that in the ring, I enjoyed working with Bruno Sammartino because it was firm, it was tough, it was a real thing. Now, people come up to me today, and we're talking about the real deal here now, and they'll say, well, wrestling's fake. Wrestling's just a show. Well, wrestling is not fake. And when I say that, everybody turns their head like, "Ooh, what are you talking about?" But it's real. When you pick somebody up in the air and you slam them, you tell me how in the world you can defeat gravity. Is it real or not? Mm-hmm. Does gravity work? Does guys go out and bust their butts and take all kinds of risks to entertain the fans? Sometimes their head's bleeding to entertain the fans. Mm-hmm. Is that fake? Heck no. Do they know the outcome of the match before they go in the ring? Well, sure they do. And if anybody can't figure that out, they're a Looney Tune. Mm-hmm. Wrestling is a great form of entertainment. I quit watching wrestling in the 90s, late 90s, because first of all, I'd found my faith in the Lord Jesus Christ. They were having fornication in a coffin, and their storylines just didn't fall in line with what my faith was. Mm-hmm. So I quit watching it. I'm watching it now. I turned it on, and somebody said, "Hey, it's George. George has changed." I started watching it, and I really enjoy it. It's very entertaining. The storylines are great. The wrestling, wrestling is wrestling. And that's not knocking it. It's just, it's what it's always been. Mm-hmm. They fly around a little bit more. They don't use as many wrestling holds, but I'm not here to criticize that. They're great athletes. They're better athletes than what we were. Mm-hmm. To be honest with you, they're just not as tough as we were.
It was. I've heard some interviews with you, and one of the things I thought was true is you said, there's really no place. The guy can't go all around the country and learn their craft and then go to the WWE. They pretty much just come out of a wrestling school. Do you think if you come straight from a wrestling school, it's harder to really showcase your stuff on TV and know what you're doing?
Not the way the business is today. It's a different business. They couldn't have done that in the 60s. Mm-hmm. They couldn't do that because you had to learn your craft, and it wasn't just holds and taking bumps. It was psychology. It was ring psychology. It was telling a story with wrestling in the ring, not standing in the middle of the ring and talking, but telling the story with wrestling. And it took a great talent to be able to do that, and you had to have somebody that could do it, that you could work with. Mm-hmm. Now I call it a performance because most everything that's done is pretty much like a choreographed performance. So what gets over in one time might not get over in the next. When you're working a crowd, when everything is called in the ring, and you're using ring psychology, you should be able to have a great match every night.
Yeah. When you find yourself watching wrestling, do you look at it as a fan, or do you look at it as someone who's in the business and kind of critique what they're doing and how the wrestling's changed?
No, I honestly, I tape the match, and I watch the storylines. Because the wrestling, and this is not a put down to the athletes at all. It's not. It's just not what I'm into. It's what I did 100 years ago. I'm a dinosaur. These guys are young bulls running. What they do now is not what we did back then. So it's not what my interest is all about. But I do like the storylines, and I like the entertainment part of that part of it. But the wrestling is wrestling. Heck, I coached amateur wrestling for 18 years.
Yeah,
I've seen enough of it.
You talked about have a lot of heat with Bruno and stuff. Did you ever have any run-ins with fans, outside of the ring?
Me?
Yeah,
I've had 3 or 4 lawsuits. Yeah, usually fans would get excited. I'm not. You said I'm having a feud with Bruno.
You said you when you used to have a lot of heat in the ring with Bruno. I thought maybe outside the ring that fans.
We're talking about business heat.
Yeah.
And when you say heat with Bruno, I thought
right.
I was mad at him.
No, I didn't mean that.
No. I just want to make that straight.
Yeah, I meant with the fans.
Bruno was. See, back then, I would come in. I just wrestled basic in the summertime because I was a school teacher to coach, and I was a part-time wrestler. A lot of people didn't realize that. But when I came into the Northeast, I was always involved in the main events. So when I come in. On television, I called it chop meat. When I went on television, anyone that went on in the ring with me on TV, I wasn't going to give them anything. I was going to grind them like they were in a meat grinder. The reason being, when Bruno would come out in the house show, I never wrestled him on TV. When he would come out in the house show, they expected a war. And I was going to grind Bruno in a meat grinder. Well, you don't grind Bruno in a meat grinder. He's too doggone strong and tough. Although I tried at times, we got great reactions from it. We worked very stiff, very firm. We always knew the outcome, but God, our matches were real. I'm telling you, bruised up, both of us, hammered up, and we put on a hard-fought, entertaining match that was predetermined. We knew how it was going to come out, but boy, the fans. Because when he hit me, you heard it all over the arena. When I hit him, you heard it all over the arena. And it wasn't just slapping our hand on him either. So people reacted to it. It was tough stuff. I like to call it tough love because you have to work that tough to entertain your fans. You got to love your fans. Mm-hmm. Else you can go out and work like two limp wimps. And I can remember some guys coming in the ring that were like that. They'd hit me like this here. I wouldn't even feel it, so I didn't sell it. And I'd whack them. And I say, hit me. I'm a wrestler. I'm not a pillow. Let's get down and get with it. And that's how I always thought about the business until later on when I got a little older and become a cartoon character, maybe a little smarter. I don't know.
Here from the chat room, Brains wants to know: do you agree with people who say that Haku was the toughest guy in the business?
Boy, you know what? I've been on the street with. I've caught his act. Mm-hmm. He's a great guy. He is one of the best people, as far as I'm concerned, to ever wear the wrestling tights. He is a tough, vicious guy. But you know what? I wouldn't say he's the toughest ever. There's a lot of them guys around. Yeah. I would say one of the toughest for his era, which was more like in the 80s, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah.
There's a guy, what's his name? He was an Olympic guy. No, not very big. Huh?
No. Brad Reagans?
Before Reagans even. From Oklahoma. Three-time national.
Huh? Danny Hodge.
Danny Hodge. Yeah. Danny Hodge, pound for pound, was one of the toughest people I've ever seen in my life. Was he the toughest ever? How about this guy? And I was never around him. That he won a gold medal in the Olympics.
Kurt Angle?
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah, he's got to be, a pretty tough wrestler. Now, what you got to be careful of is Haku's not necessarily a tough wrestler. Mm-hmm. He's a tough son of a gun.
Yeah.
I mean, instead of putting a hammerlock on you or a wrist lock, he'll take your eye out. Mm-hmm. There's a difference. That's what I call a shooter. Mm-hmm. The other guys I call wrestlers, great amateur wrestlers, but there's a whole lot of difference in some of those folks.
Did you ever get into a shoot in the ring?
Yeah, I started early on in my career. I had one wild shoot in the ring. Yes, sir.
Oh, who was that with?
You wouldn't know him. His name, in fact, after that night, it was his last night in the business.
Okay.
But his name, they called him the Great Mephisto, and there was another one they called the Great Mephisto. Not that one. This was another one from Flint, Michigan, and he was a tough guy. And he'd had I think, a couple drinks of slow gin or something, and he got in the ring. And I'd just been in the business 3 or 4 months, and I wore a mask. I was a student, I wore a mask, and I was learning the business, and I was teaching, so I didn't want people to know who I was. So he has a bunch of bananas under the ring. So I get in the ring, and he brings out, and he has his girlfriend had him probably 50 bananas on his stalk, and he presents them to me. I look at him. I'm green. I don't know what to do with bananas other than eat them. So I thought, what am I going to do? If I eat those, I'm going to get a bellyache. If I throw them to the crowd, I'm going to get a lawsuit. So I took him and smashed him to pieces with bananas. They stuck on their favorite stick. Our mat was so slippery you could hardly stand up. And then once I got past that, I started to wrestle him. I gave him my head. He snapped it and put on a front face lock and put his forearm across the thigh. I knew immediately he was trying to break my neck. Mm. So I come up his crotch and made a soprano out of him. And then he loosened up and we wrestled a little bit. And then again, later on in the match, he's still hot. He gets my head and he comes for the neck again. First time was my fault, let him go. Second time is my turn. So when he snapped me the second time, I again made him a second soprano. And I beat the living tar out of him. I mean, it's not fair to the fans because they don't pay to see that kind of thing.
Right.
Yeah. But he was a bloody mess when I got done. And we go to the dressing room. We're all in the same dressing room. It was in Jackson, Michigan. I'll never forget it. I go in first, and the guy says, wow, what happened out there? I said, I didn't know what to do with the band. They laughed. And he come in, Bert Ruby was the promoter. And he started on, and Bert Ruby was about 60 years, or 55, 60 years old at the time, and he'd had a couple of massive heart attacks. So he starts screaming at Bert Ruby, and Crusher Cortez, another great guy from the past, stood up and he said, "Listen, this man's had a heart attack, da-da-da-da-da-da. You just got your butt to kick in the ring, and you know you can't handle it down here, so you jump on the older guy in here. You don't belong in this room with men." It was snowing. It was in Jackson, Michigan in the winter. They opened the back door, threw his luggage and his clothes out, and kicked him out of the locker room. It's the last time I saw him or heard of him. Mm-hmm. But, to me, that's the way it should be. I think it's very unprofessional to try to settle something in the ring. If people pay to see you perform and put on a great match, the worst thing you can see is a shoot. They're boring. These will last less than a minute.
Yeah.
And then you put the boots to them so you get another 2 minutes out of it. But it's just not a professional thing to do, and it doesn't prove anything. And same with riots. I used to, when I first got into business as a student, and actually a couple times in New York Territory, Northeast, I used to think it was really, if you could get them going like that, you would have great heat. So it showed that you're really a great heel. Not true. When you start having riots and the people have brought their families or friends with them, and they're getting beat up by each other, not good business.
Yeah.
So the secret of it was to get people to the point where they're ready to kill you, and they want to storm the ring, and then for the babyface to do something to take over, to bring them back down and sit down. That's ring psychology. I could have a riot every night back when I was a heel if I wanted to, because I'd just stay on the babyface and give him nothing until he was a pulp. And the people will get hot and they'll come in the ring, but it's not very entertaining, is it?
Mm-hmm. No.
So you got to use your head a little bit.
Did you have a question?
Yeah, I had a question from Don Douglas off of the message board. He wants to know if you have any memories or stories about Gary Hart.
Oh, sure. Gary and I broke into the business together way back when. Actually, he was in the business maybe a year before me in Chicago. And my first manager was a guy about 39 years old, never drank, never smoked, and was always in great shape. I'm talking because I'm trying to think of his name. I can't right now. But he came to the ring. They put him with me just so he could kind of guide me along because I didn't know how to lace my boots. I was so green. And he came in the dressing room one night in a small show in Detroit, high school, fundraiser, spun around and fell dead in the middle of the locker room. And one of the old-timers, Johnny Gates, who never won a match, and I remember, this is all new to me, he says, "Hey, quick, get him back in the ring. Before he cools off, I might be able to get a win."
Oh, my God.
My head
Sorry for the
around. I thought, what in the hell am I getting into? Here's a dead guy that everybody liked, and now the guy wants to get him in the ring while he's still warm so he can beat him. Then about 2 weeks later, they brought in Gary Hart. The only reason being that Bert, saw some things in me that he thought I could be a talent. And he thought he was developing a wrestler to go around other territories and wrestle. What Bert didn't understand, and nobody else did, I was not looking for a wrestling career. I wasn't even a wrestling fan. I was trying to make some money to feed my family. I was teaching, making $4,300 a year, and had 2 children and a third one on the way. I needed some money. And so a friend of mine was a wrestling fan, and he talked me into calling Bert Ruby one night. We were having a couple of beers late at night. And I went over to see him the next day, and that's how this all started. And when Gary Hart come in, God, I mean, we had so much heat with everybody, the wrestlers, the fans, and everybody else, because Gary would ride with one group, and I would ride with another group. And I would knock Gary to the people I was with in the car, and they would start telling me, they'd agree with me naturally. And Gary would start knocking me, and he'd tell me, "That student, he's so stiff." And I was very stiff. And then, I hate working with him. I do this. Then we get to the dressing room, and Gary would say, "Well, Jim, you know what they said about you?" The guys are sitting right there. Well, that's nothing. You know what they said about you? So we had a lot of fun. Gary was one of the greatest minds in the history of the wrestling business. And I'll tell you what, we learned an awful lot from each other. We really did. I was with Gary just before he died. I was doing a personal appearance at a Fort Worth baseball game. They had the oldest active manager in baseball. He's 92 years old. And Gary and I had our picture taken with him, and I was doing the autographs, and we was just reminiscing and having Gary Hart was one great tough guy, and he was tough. And he threw. We had a riot one time in Grand Rapids, and the people are going nuts. And he threw a working punch at this guy, and the guy sold it. And we looked at each other like, whoa. And then as this guy's trying to get to us, the cop said to him, I'm talking about 64. And the cop said to him, he says, relax, you know this is all a show. And I'll never forget this line, because it's what wrestling is all about. He said, I know it's a show, but 2-on-1's not fair anyplace. That's the wrestling business.
We had him on the show, and we met him. He was a great guy, and actually, we were going to have him back on. It was right before he passed away. But did you ever try to get him into the WWF as a manager when he was?
Oh yes, absolutely. Through the first 3 years I was in the WWF, they didn't know that I was going to be around very long. Mm-hmm. They didn't know what kind of talent I had. They didn't know what they were going to do with me. I was a part-time wrestler, and so you know how I ended up going, all that crap. Back then, I did all my own interviews. They were very articulate. I did all my own talk. I didn't have a manager at all until 72, and I had the Grand Wizard, who was one of the best of them all. Mm-hmm. And but prior to that, I'd told Vince Senior, I said, "Hey, this Gary Hart, he's great. He's good on the mic, and he gets heat, and he's just a real class guy." And I think it was Pete Sanchez was in Texas when Gary first went to Texas after him and I split apart. And he came back to the Northeast, and he's a very close friend of Bruno. And for some reason, he said that Gary had been knocking Bruno. But I know Gary pretty well. I don't think he'd do that. Mm-hmm. So I pushed him, and Bruno blocked him. And then and told me why, because Bruno's a stand-up guy. And so I was talking to Gary later on. I said, well, the reason you can't come to New York is you were knocking Bruno Sammartino in the locker room in Texas. He said, that's BS. I never met him. I've never knocked him. I don't talk about people that I don't know. I never did that. So I got to believe Gary on that one. I don't think he would do that. But I understand where Bruno's coming from. If you think somebody's trying to come in territory where you're the king, and you hear these knocking you, then you block them. So that's what happened there.
Yeah. Did you see a lot of that? Maybe people spreading rumors about other people so they wouldn't get spots.
Listen, the politics in wrestling, not so much now, but back when I was a student and becoming George Steele, it was unbelievable. I can tell you 3 or 4 stories that were just. The first time I didn't go to the North. The first time I went was 1967. I didn't go to the WWF, and I just went to Pittsburgh. And that was just an arm of the WWF. Mm-hmm. And Bruno lived in Pittsburgh, so he worked there quite a bit. And I went in, and I made more money than I didn't know. I was a school teacher, and I didn't know how much money I should be making. My biggest payoff before Pittsburgh was I think $150, and that was the main event in the Cobo Arena in Detroit. Most of my payouts were $25, $30, $80. I didn't know. I didn't have a clue. Mm. When the first time I got like $1,200 for a show, I was blown away. And the promoters and Bruno and everybody was telling me how much they enjoyed my show and how hard I was working. And I kept telling them, thank you for the payoffs I was getting. They were huge. And I was there for about 5-6 months. When I went back to Detroit, I started hearing rumors about Bruno telling everybody how stiff I was. He's stiff too, by the way. And how hard I was to deal with, and so on and so forth. And after us complimenting each other, it angered me, because I'm I'm look in the face and tell you what I think. Anyone that knows me knows that I'm like that. And Bruno's the same way. So I lost a lot of respect for Bruno. He lost a lot, and I could never tell on him that I was pissing, complaining about the payoffs all the time. I never made that much money. I couldn't believe it, how much I was making. But back then, that was like a fortune. I was making $4,300 a year. I made $1,200 in one night, and I'm going to complain?
Right.
You got to, come on, do the math on that one. So anyhow, the word got back to Bruno that I was complaining about the payoffs, it got back to me that he was complaining about my work. Meanwhile, because of the success we had in Pittsburgh, and they needed some new heels in the Northeast, Bruno told Vince about me, Vince Sr. I'm talking about now, Vince Jr.'s dad, about me, and that we could draw money, but what a jerk I was. Well, Vince, Mr. McMahon, I call him always Mr. McMahon, said, well, he's a jerk. Do we want? Bruno said, hey, but he was great with us. So he calls me up, and I'm teaching at school. He calls me and says, hey, this is Bruno. And I start screaming at him because I'm hot because he's complaining about the way I work. I'm trying to tell him, if you didn't like the way I work, why don't you man up and tell me face to face? And he's telling me, if I didn't like the payouts, why did I say something to him instead of going around complaining? So finally we put it together that the Sheik and some of the guys in Detroit were telling me one thing, they was telling him another thing. It was strictly business because the Sheik, actually, if you look at it, I think he had a run after I was done because I had to go back for school. In 1968, my first run in there, the Sheik was in there after that. So, it stands to reason that maybe, I'm not saying he did, but maybe he was just trying to get my run, or get a run before I did. Or he saw that I was getting over with, in Pittsburgh, and he was trying to jump on the opportunity. I don't know that, but why would they tell me that kind of stuff, and why would they tell Bruno that kind of stuff? Now, that's politics. And it was working because they had both of us hot.
Right.
But what it did in the long run, because of that, it kind of made us respect each other a little bit because we learned that we were both stand-up people, and it made us bond a little bit. I mean, we've had our run-ins, Bruno and I, absolutely, but we always respected each other, always, because of the toughness. Does that make sense?
Definitely.
Is that what you meant by politics?
Yeah, exactly.
And then I know there's other guys that come in later on. I was an agent, and this guy, I wore an orange outfit, was supposed to be out of jail or something. I can't think of his name right now.
Nails.
Yeah. And the guys every night they were telling him, he was in tag teams with guys like Bossman and so on and so forth, and they were telling him how much money they were making, and he was getting screwed, until he lost it and went in and jumped all over Vince.
Yeah.
And he was making the same money they were making. But the guys will play with your mind like that if you let them. Junkyard Dog and I were very close. He'd always come up after a big show and say, George, boy, this is the big one. I got the best payoff, blah, blah, blah. I knew he was lying to me. I knew pretty much what everybody was making. I'd been around a long time at that point. We're talking, 87. I started in 1968, so you're going to fool me and something like that. So I let him go on a little bit. And then I finally looked and said, Dog, is that all they paid you? As hard as you worked, that's all you got? Man, they're screwing over you. And then he would lose. He was trying to get me to lose it. I'd get him to lose it. Then he'd look at me, and I'd crack up, and he'd crack up. We'd both laugh. But some guys did it serious. Mine was just a chuckle here or there.
Yeah. Let's see. We get a caller on the line, Optimus. Do you have a question?
Sure.
Yes, sir. Mr. Steele, it's great talking to you tonight.
Well, thank you.
In an interview that went up last Thursday or so, you were asked a question about Bret Hart and the Montreal screw job, and you seem to have some negative feelings about that. Would you care to elaborate a little more?
I don't know if they're negative or not. They're not negative. I disagree with that. I have great respect for Bret Hart. Here's what I said, and I say it every time, and I see it as the truth. Number one, let's call our business, if we're going to call our business and talk about it, what it is, did any of the champions ever really beat anybody? Huh?
No.
Okay. You got to get A on that one. All right, so then if Bret Hart's complaint was that he was in Canada and he was losing to an American in his home country, my question is, where did he win the belt?
Right.
So,
that's a big
what are we talking about? I can't lose at my country, but I can beat you in your country. I see that as a negative. I'm talking about business now. And so then if Vince gave him the belt and he wants it back and he don't want to give it back, who's screwing who? Is that negative on my side? I don't think so. I just think that some people don't understand the business, and the fans, I understand that, but they also come and say, "Oh, that's all fake," and they get hot. about a screw job, which was part of the work. And it was the most brilliant work probably in the history of the business. Now, would you like to know why?
Yeah, I was just saying, so you think the whole thing itself was a work?
Well, sure it was.
Uh-huh.
Let's look at what was happening. Let's look at the history. Bret Hart was making a pretty good paycheck for the WWF. Vince is not going to pay you like the WCW were paying you. He didn't have Ted Turner's money at the time. He does now, but he didn't then. So guys, Hulk Hogan, Scott Hall, Diesel, all left the WWF for more money in the WCW. Am I right?
Mm-hmm. Definitely.
All right. So what is Bret Hart done? He's going to leave to go to the WCW for more money. Mm-hmm. So they do the screw job as a work. Who becomes the top heel in the history of the business?
Yeah, it worked out great for WWF.
No, but who came the top heel?
Vince McMahon.
Okay. Now listen, I'm talking about work now. So now the next guy that's going to leave, Vince can sit in the corner and do nothing for 6 months. Somebody's leaving for whatever reason or gets in trouble. He presents himself again, and you forget about who's leaving because he's the hottest heel.
Right. And he's not going to be leaving. So.
No, he's going to stay.
Right.
And then using that premise a little bit deeper, think about Steve Austin. Mm-hmm. In my opinion, one of the great, great, great tough guys in the history of the business, as far as his work was concerned. Mm-hmm. And I say that because we were having a tournament one time. He caught something in the mouth, and he split his lip. He almost looked like a hair lip, and I had to take him over and get him stitched up.
I think that was the King of the Ring, yeah.
And then he went back, and I'm the one that took him to the doctor. So I know how tough he is. He went back and finished the show. Mm-hmm. So I had a lot of respect for him. I have a respect for all the guys, really.
Yeah.
But I just say it like I see it. Sometimes it pisses people off. I've always been like that, so that's fine. Anyhow, what made him such a great champion and great worker?
That feud with McMahon, I mean, was perfect.
Oh, you got it. When was that? Was that after the Bret Hart thing?
Yep.
Okay, I think we figured it. The class is over.
Right.
Am I making sense?
Oh, yeah, definitely. I've heard people say, too, that, I would bring up Owen, but if the Owen Hart, if he hadn't died, then Bret probably would have come back and did like a feud with Hitman at some point in time. But then they really did have bad blood, after his brother passed away.
Oh yeah, well Bret wasn't around until after Vince Senior, Mr. McMahon passed away. I don't think.
I mean Owen.
Oh, I don't know. Owen, yeah. He was after. I don't remember any of those guys when Mr. McMahon was there.
Vince, after Bret left WCW. Now, if this was like an all work, like you said, that he would eventually come back, but then there was heat. There was heat.
Vince set himself up to become the heel to cover for guys that was walking away from him. Mm. So yeah, he wasn't happy with them.
Yeah, he
wasn't ready to say, "Oh, let's go have a dance."
Right.
He was angry, but he set himself up so they could cover the changes. And to me, that was pretty brilliant.
Uh-huh.
Again, I'm looking at it as a worker looking from the business inside the tent, and a lot of people are looking outside the tent and trying to peek underneath it.
Right.
I would have never had these conversations until about 1986 is when Vince broke kayfabe. Mm-hmm. And then they did the click, click, click in Madison Square Gardens, if you remember that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah, and they kind of exposed it.
I believe they call it,
yeah. Yeah, so I'm not knocking again, the business changed, so we handle it differently. Mm-hmm. When they exposed it, before that, you'd had to cut my throat before I would tell you anything about what was going on inside the business. Mm-hmm. I was a kayfabe guy all the way. Kayfabe was ran by the wrestlers. If we had somebody that's breaking kayfabe, the promoters didn't even know what kayfabe was half the time. The boys handled it. Mm-hmm. And then when they started getting contracts and it became Vince's business, the boys were no longer in charge of kayfabe, and kayfabe died. Mm-hmm. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
But back when I started, we were independent contractors, and everything I did was relevant to my business. It was my personal business. I was my own boss. back then, they never come up and said, okay, you're going to get beat tonight. They say, George, would you mind doing the favor for somebody? And I had the right to say yes or no. And then on how we were going to do it.
Do you think before the business was exposed that all the fans truly believed everything?
Oh, no.
Or
No.
do you think they knew what it was, but they enjoyed it anyway?
That's a great question. And when we're not, all the fans, they argued about it. Mm-hmm. People argued about it. Some thought it was real, others thought it was a show. How could you jump off the top rope and not break his neck? Great question. How could you do that? How can you slam them and they don't get hurt? Well, they do get hurt.
Right.
But see, the biggest problem in the wrestling business later on, and so many deaths in the business, steroids. They're nuts. Steroids didn't have anything to do with that stuff. I mean, people weren't dying in baseball or football, were they?
No.
Lyle Exada, but that was something totally different.
Yeah.
They were dying from pain pills because they put their body at risk to entertain their fans or loyal fans, and wrestling fans are loyal. And then they'd go and hurt themselves, and they'd take a couple pain pills, then have a couple of drinks, and bing, bing, goodbye. That's what all those deaths were about. It wasn't, cocaine and heroin and all. It was pain pills.
Yeah.
Guess why? Because they're selling their body to entertain their fans.
Was pain pills a big problem back, like in your prime, or do you think that was more of a thing back in?
We didn't do things like that.
Yeah.
We didn't do those kind of bumps. I mean, a 500-pounder didn't get on the top rope and do a moonsault. Mm-hmm. Haystacks Calhoun had a hard time getting in the ring.
Right.
You understand what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Fat guys and big guys work like fat guys and big guys. Mm-hmm. When fat guys and big guys started working like 125-pounders, they got hurt.
Right.
It's common sense.
Yeah, I don't mean any disrespect for this, but if I watch some of your old matches, and I mean, you'll get a big reaction from all the crowd without doing
anything,
a ton of stuff in the ring. Yeah,
it's a totally different business. Mm-hmm. See, and people don't understand that. I'm going to explain it to you. You want to hear it?
Sure.
I don't want to bore you, but I'll tell you what's going on there. Less is best in the movies, in the wrestling business, in anything you do. But TV is like a monster. And the more you feed it, the stronger it gets. And the more wrestlers' talent you feed it, the stronger it gets. The more you got to do to make it hungry. So the guys started taking high-risk moves. I can remember when I was still wrestling in the, as a cartoon character, I never had to get on the top rope. I never got on the bottom rope. I did one time. I'll tell you about that, too. That's funny. But anyhow, they were doing more and more things, and some of the guys were paying the guys that were there to make them look good and a few extra $100 to make at-risk moves. The business I was broke into, we wanted to make it look like we were killing each other, but my job was to protect your body, and your job was to make sure I didn't get hurt. Mm-hmm. Now, by get hurt, I mean breaking a neck, a leg, an arm, or something like that. I'm going to hurt you. We're wrestling. But I'm not going to hurt you so that you got to go to the hospital.
Yeah, something more permanent.
You're not going to have to miss work the next day. You're going to be able to go to the ring the next day. So, we're talking about different things there. But the more risky things they started to do, the bigger the television was getting because it was swallowing them up. That's why talent was going through in the 80s. They were coming. It was like the floodgates opened up. The top talent in the world was coming from all over, and they were being gobbled up by the TV. Some guys just didn't make it. Mm-hmm. I was going to tell you about my big experience on the bottom rope.
Yeah, I actually wrote this down here in case you.
I'm not going to forget that.
In case you skip. All right.
We were getting ready for WrestleMania. I think it was 4 or 3 or something. 4 probably, and the Birdman had come into play. A Coco Beware, and I was working with who was going to be his opponent on the pay-per-view, the WrestleMania, mm-hmm. And they saw something going on, and they decided, without anyone knowing, to send Coco Beware down to help me and to do something to who was going to be his opponent. I don't remember who it was, I'm going to be honest with you. But anyhow, he come down, he got in the ring, he boom, boom, did the guy a little bit, got up on the top rope and threw a drop kick off the top rope, hit the guy in the chest, he went down, and I covered him 1, 2, 3, and the place went nuts. So then I started clapping my hands with him, and he's telling me to get up on the rope. So I get up on the bottom rope, and I'm clapping my hands like he did when he was on the top rope, and I threw my feet out and landed on my butt. The house came down. It was a cartoon move. It was a clown move. But after what he did, the people loved that. And the real hardcore wrestling fans come to me, oh, Jesus Christ, what are you doing? You're eating the turnbuckles? I had one guy who wrestled one time tell me that I was ruining wrestling because I was eating the turnbuckles and the fans could see that it was only stuffing. And I said, well, whenever I run somebody's head into it over there, it's not in the turnbuckle pad, it's in the post behind it. It makes it look a little more real. And I said, if the fans don't know that that big cushion-looking thing that looks like a pillow is filled with stuffing, then they got to be nuts. This guy, who was a real superstar, looked at me and said, you know, you're right. He was chewing me out, telling me I was exposing the business. I said, you expose the business, and you run his head in there, and he takes a bump.
Along the lines of the turnbuckle, there was a lot of people on Facebook were asking, like, did you ever worry about actually biting the turnbuckle after guys are wrestling in the ring?
What do you mean by that?
Like,
obviously I didn't worry about it. I did it.
There you go. I believe Brad Thacker asked. Yeah, his question was, how gross was it to chew on the turnbuckles?
Well, I didn't really chew on it. Right. I went over and bit it one bite. I didn't gnaw on it and drool on it and all that crap. Right. The first time it happened, do you know how that all started?
No, I don't actually.
Well, that's kind of probably an interesting story. I was in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. This is early on, and I was George Steele. I wasn't the Animal yet. In fact, the WWF never called me the Animal. The fans named me the Animal because of the look and how I wrestled back then. Some people think it's a cartoon character. They should have been back there in the 60s or even the 70s. Anyhow, they used to give away gifts, I think I remember this correctly, at the TV every now and then, just to give the fans to come and go, to the fans to come to the TV show, because we use that to promote the arena shows, and that's where we made our money. So this one show, they give away these little couch pillows, and a lady got real excited, and she threw her pillow at me. Now, this was in Pittsburgh Studio Wrestling, and they had about 250 people in there. Then behind them, this is black and white TV, so you know where I'm coming from. Behind them, they had plywood with white faces painted on it to make the crowd look bigger. And so to entice these people to come in, this lady got mad at me and threw a pillow at me. So I got the pillow. It's kind of like the bananas, except I couldn't beat her up. What am I going to do? Sit on it to be boring? Throw it back at them. There's 200 pillows out there. They'll bomb me with pillows. I'll bite it. So I bite it. And it exploded because these little couch pillows were really packed tight and real light stuff. And it kind of exploded and went in the air, and it's coming down like the snow. And it's sticking in my hair. I kind of look like the abominable snowman. And I'm kicking the guy, and this stuff is flying around. And then I take the pillow and I put it over his head. And I start choking him. Good TV, right? I got the pillow over his head. I'm looking at the camera. I'm checking him. And I ripped the pillow off. And he's blue because the stuffing was lighter than air, and every time he breathed in, the stuffing went down his lungs and almost killed him.
Oh goodness!
So I go to the dressing room, and the wrestlers like they are, they're all laughing. Oh, you almost killed that guy! What the hell? You could be great if somebody would throw a pillow at you every night. And Tony Puglisi, Bruno's cousin, said, maybe you could eat the turnbuckles. 2 weeks later, I'm wrestling Strongbow. I don't even remember where. And the match just, it wasn't getting over. It was kind of flat, and usually we had pretty good matches. So I look at the turnbuckle, I thought, I wondered. These were the old Everlast turnbuckle. I went over, snapped at that thing, it tore. It was unbelievable how easy it tore. And it was corduroy type stuff. And then the stuffing in there was blue, red, white, yellow, all different colors, so it was very colorful. Very colorful match. I rubbed that in his face and boom, boom, boom. Ran his head into the turnbuckle. He took a bump back, and we had a riot. I'm thinking, why in the world So I have to do all that hard work when I can just at the right time eat a turnbook and run his head into it. So from then on, I became very well known for munching on turnbuckles, and part of the cartoon thing, people would go nuts when I'd bite on the turnbuckle.
Right.
So, it's whatever they wanted. I don't care.
Yeah. Did any promoter, anybody ever get mad at you for ripping up too many?
Oh, golly, Phil Zacco used to run Philadelphia and Baltimore, and he would come up to me, and now he knew that I was an educator. He knew that I coached and taught school. He knew that I could talk. I talked to him before matches. But once I start wrestling and got in character, he thought I was a wild man. And I really was, because I did change a little bit. It wasn't just, I left the locker room, I could be laughing and talking to you. As soon as I hit the door, I became crazy. Mm-hmm. And it was just natural for me. And I really believe it's two people are using the same body, because I never really tried it. It just happened. I'm working on a book, and there's reasons that I snapped from my childhood and so on and so forth. So I'd really snap, and it was a real deal. Anyhow, he'd come up to me. Sometimes I'd tear 3 turnbuckles in one night. You're turning all my turnbuckles, and you don't have enough to have a show tomorrow night. He'd just scream at me. And then we'd go to TV, and Mr. McMahon, Vince's dad, would bring me 1 or 2 boxes, 24 turnbuckles in each one, to give to Phil Zacco. And so I'd give them to Phil. He said, "Oh, that's all right, kid. Thank you. He'd love to get turnbuckles." And so he was all happy until the next show he had, when I'd tear up 1 or 2 of them, he'd go nuts again. So Mr. McMahon and I was kind of ribbing him. And meanwhile, think about this, and this is before I become a cartoon character. Now I'm one of the top heels in the business, and we're selling tickets galore, and selling out the Boston Garden, selling out the Madison Square Garden, selling out the new Philadelphia Spectrum, and he's complaining about 3 or 4 turnbuckles. Do the math. I mean, come on.
Intro, you have a question from the board?
Yeah, I had a question from Terry. He wants to know, how was it like working with Randy Savage and Elizabeth?
Oh, boy, I get asked that all the time. It was a great experience, really. Randy was a real pro. The difference was Randy was from the new era, and I was from the old era. And Randy was a perfectionist, and he wanted everything to be done just boom, boom, boom. He wanted the match to be well planned out. I'm going to call it in the ring. Now, I wrestled Randy's dad in Detroit when Randy was about maybe 15 years old. So he's a kid. And so now he's getting his big break in the Big Apple in the Northeast, and actually the whole world with the WWF at that time, because we were expanding big time. And we're going to work this thing. They asked the cartoon character to take us some flowers to give to Elizabeth, and he did his thing, and it really got pretty wild. It really was a great 2 years. But the first time we were going to work was on a Saturday night main event. And he comes in with a notebook with about 4 pages with a match written out. He says to me, "George, this is what we're going to do now." I'm dyslexic, first of all. I don't read well. Secondly, I always felt like, I'm the old man, you better respect me. I've been here a long time, son. You're a new kid on the block. Mm-hmm. So I read the paper, the page, and all due respect, as I take it and I wrinkle it up, I throw it in the garbage in front of him. He goes, so I did the second, third, fourth, and fifth page. And I said to him, "Just listen to me, kid, and we'll have a great match." That's old school meeting the new era. You understand that? I didn't dislike him. I loved him. What the heck? I think he had a lot of respect and loved me too. But he's going to tell me how to do it his way. I'm going to try to do it my way. And the bottom line is, in the long run, it worked out pretty good. Mm-hmm. We had a great run, and Elizabeth was in the middle of it. And people asked me, "Well, gee, she's a lot younger than you. Why were you so smitten over her?" I said, I tell them, "Well, I got a daughter, older than Elizabeth." Uh-huh. But my wife don't do windows. I always kept the business fun inside. I didn't want to ever get hot at anybody. Mm-hmm. Or, I tried to respect everybody. My motto was always respect all, fear none.
I think it was on the Timeline DVD, which I recommend anybody out there to pick up, was you said that Tito was going to originally have that run with Macho Man.
Yes.
Was he mad at all?
No,
that you took over?
Tito was a great professional. He really was. In fact, as Tito was getting ready for that whole thing, and he had the belt at one point before that with him, and I think it was with Valentine. He dropped it to Valentine. I was going around the country putting him over, 1, 2, 3 in the middle of the ring, and here I am, a bona fide old timer, and here's a young kid coming in. In fact, we were doing a signing in California a couple of weeks ago, and he come up. He said, "George, I never understood why you were so grateful to do that for me." I said, "Son, it was a business. I saw you as a great talent, and you respected me. If you had disrespected me, I wouldn't have done it. But you're a great talent, and it's my turn to give back." And then they switched it, and I ended up with the run, and you ended up the other way. But it says, that's just the nature of the business.
Yeah.
The cartoon character could do nothing wrong in those days. I mean, we had a match in Madison Square Gardens. Who was in it? Oh boy. It seems like it was John Studd. Let me think. John Studd. Bobby Heenan was involved in it, and I was with the tag team that turned me babyface.
U.S. Express.
Yeah, Barry Windham and Mike Rotunda.
Yeah,
and they had. Oh man, I can't even think. Age is tough on the brain, man. Don't go there. Well, it might be better than the alternative.
Right.
It was, let me see. Oh, Adrian Adonis. And I think it was John Studd and Bobby Heenan, and the three of us. And they didn't want to beat any of us. The office didn't want to, really beat anybody, but they wanted to put on a great show in the middle of Madison Square Garden. So they're coming up with ideas, and no one's coming to anything. I said, well, let me handle it. They said, well, how are you going to do it? I says, well, I'm going to get in the chair. I'm going to get a chair and bring it in the ring. I'm going to chase Bobby. Bobby runs and gets out of the ring. I'll chase Adonis. He'll run and get out of the ring. I'll chase John Studd. He'll roll out and get out of the ring. And then I'll look at you, Barry. You back up and get out of the ring. Rotunda, you get out of the ring. And then there's only one left as a referee, so I hit him in the head with a chair, and the place will go nuts. And I get DQ'd. The place went absolutely crazy. And it was George Steele, and the cartoon character, could get away with that. When I told everybody about it in the locker room, they all laughed at me. But it worked like a charm. He got everything out of there, he got it done, and the referee took the bump. I mean, come on. But I could do that. Then I could see, before I used my foreign objects as a weapon to win matches over baby faces, or even to have a chance to beat Bruno, I'd use something. He's going to beat me anyhow, but I tried to beat him. Right. Later on, as a cartoon character, I could take it out, let everybody in the arena see it, don't let the referee see it, which is what I did as a heel, and then hit my opponent with it, and cover him 1, 2, 3, and the place would go nuts. When I was a heel, I would do the same thing. No one could. Everybody in the arena could see it. I wouldn't let the referee see it. I told the referees, if you see it, disqualify me. So I worked hard to not let him see it. Then I'd hit the baby face, and he'd catch me. Or a lot of times I won. I beat Tony Gurria like that probably 100 times. And every time we did it, we almost had a riot.
Yeah.
But when I was a cartoon character, they loved me for doing it. So it's just a matter of how you do things.
Were there ever times you actually had nothing in your hand?
No.
Okay, because I know, I think Bobby Heenan, when he was on the show, he actually, or maybe was in here, I don't know, but he talked about some, like the art of a foreign object where there's really nothing in your hand.
Well, I can tell you a story on that one. I mean, Bruno will get mad at me on this one, but it's a funny story. One of my great friends, and his too, was Mikkel, the Baron Cicluna. And they were working one night, and they needed some heat. And Bruno said, use the foreign object. And the Baron said, I don't have the foreign object. So the later Bruce said, use the foreign object. I don't have the foreign object. Bruno said, you know that, and I know that, but they don't know that. He said, oh, yeah, but don't.
That's awesome.
But that's fun stuff. And, to get hot over that, I don't think Bruno would get mad at me saying that. But that was fun stuff. That's the stories that the business makes it so great, I think.
Yeah.
And again, because of the character, had some the diehards that want everything to be stiff get pissed off at me. That really bothers me. You know what? I live on the ocean front in Florida. I don't know where they live.
Now, do you have any long injuries from the ring?
Old injuries?
Yeah.
Yes, I do. I have a health problem. I had to quit wrestling because of Crohn's disease. I think that was brought in by the business, but I almost lost a leg one time, taking a bump over the top rope, over the post in the corner, trying to be Ric Flair, and I'm not. And, a couple of other things like that. But people ask me today, I'm 75 years old. Mm-hmm. Do you still wrestle? I say, yeah. To get out of bed.
There's a million questions on the Facebook here. I'll try to ask a couple of them. Stephen Carroll wants to know, how did you make your tongue so green?
We sit down in a creative meeting, and we thought for 4 months, how could we really make something different on George Steele? Maybe we could paint his tongue green, or maybe get it tattooed green, or something like that. Not. What happened was I'd had a couple of drinks in Pittsburgh. I didn't want the promoters to know it, so I threw a Chlorette Smith in my mouth, the old kind of minty kind of looking, and went on live TV, and my tongue was green. I didn't know it. And the switchboard lit up, and they, why is his tongue green? Da, da, da. And this is just after color TV come out. They were trying to adjust their TVs. They thought they were screwed up. And then the following Friday at the Civic Center, there was all kinds of green tongues hanging around the arena. I laughed at that, but I wasn't real big. I'm not real smart. About 3 months later, I thought, I'm going to do that green tongue thing again, this time on purpose. So I throw a Chlorette in my mouth. I get the same results. After that, you know what happened? I had the best breath in wrestling. And people, do they talk about my wrestling ability? I coach wrestling for 18 years. I do know how to wrestle. Mm-hmm. And I do know how to talk. But they come up to me and, boy, how come you eat turnbuckles? How come your tongue was green? Everything else I did, they forgot about. Those are the things that I'm noted for.
Yeah.
But at least they remember.
Mm-hmm. Now you really embraced, the character, which, maybe you could have said, I don't want to do this cartoony thing, but you really embraced it, made it work. Now, when you were an agent, did you ever see any guys that you really think could have took off, but they just didn't embrace, the character?
Oh, it happened a lot. What happened when they started having a creation team and developing talent and characters? A lot of them become very, very plastic. Mm-hmm. There were a few that was really good. The Undertaker.
Oh yeah.
Ted DiBiase. Mm-hmm. They picked up on those characters big time. But so many of them were so plastic and phony, and it just wasn't natural for him. God, we had a guy who could have been a great wrestler. They called him the Dumpster, and they had him as a junk man carrying. Come on, what can you do with that? Then they had another guy. They come in, and they called him Yankum.
Yeah.
I mean, there's a dentist with bad rotten teeth. What are you going to do with him? Of course, he did come on a little bit later on and become a superstar at the WWF.
Yeah, Kane.
Right. Yeah, exactly. But they started off as Jacob. Give me a break.
Yeah. Well,
it didn't work. Can you imagine that?
I've heard people say, the Red Rooster, if he would have really embraced it, he could have. But I don't know. I think there's just some things that
I'm going to tell you
with.
something. This sounds like my ego's sticking out. To do what I did and make it work, you've really got to understand the business. You cannot be stupid. You got to be smarter than the other people that are watching you. You got to know what they're going to buy. You got to know how to sell it. And it wasn't easy, but it was really fun. I mean, the office would tell the agents a lot of time when I was doing the cartoon character, see how far he could go, and still keep it believable. I mean, I had a stuffed animal called Mine, and I used to take him and had Velcro on his hands. I designed Mine and put him on the ropes. Now I'm too old to take bumps. You got the idea? So my opponent would get mad at me. I'd hit him a couple of times. He'd go over and hit Mine. When he's hit Mine and stomped on him, I would sell it. I'd be standing like he's hitting me. And I would do something to him and beat him, and then I'd have the referee hold Mine's hand up. And they loved it.
Yeah.
I mean, come on. You want cartoons? I can give you cartoons.
Kind of the reverse to what I asked. Oh, I'm sorry, go on.
Pardon?
Go on, what were you going to say? I'm sorry.
I don't know what I was going to say.
Oh, well, I was just going to ask, kind of the reverse of what I asked. Was there any, a character you saw come up and like, oh, there's no way this is going to work, and it really took off and surprised you?
Let me think. Oh, boy, I'm sure there was. I'll tell you one of the greatest workers come into business, and a lot of times Vince put them in different characters more as a rib because they were knocking the WWF before they came in. One was Dusty Rhodes, who's a big guy there now. They had him running around with polka dots on. I'm looking at him thinking, God, here's one of the great, great talents of the world, and they got him dressed in polka dots. And the same was with another one of the great, great champions of all times, and one of the toughest guys in the business. I don't care what anyone says. Was Harley Race. Mm-hmm. And Harley, before he came to the WWF and became King of the Ring, was talking about coming to a show in his hometown where he used to promote and shooting Vince McMahon because we were running opposition in his hometown. Later on, he came to work with us. And Harley's a good friend. I mean, I love Harley to pieces. I respect him. I think he's great. But they pulled a rib on him and put a crown on him and a gown and that big heavy coat. He had to carry it every day through the airport to be King of the Ring.
Right.
And again, I respect him. He did what he did and did it very well. He was a great king, but that was more of a rib than anything else, really. Mm. I think, anyhow. No one ever told me that, but I was watching how it was going on. I was like, whoa. Don Morocco is a guy that was always on top of things. Yeah. And Don and I travel a lot together. We sit in the arenas together with Vince and Bull Dip and things like that. We just look at each other and laugh and roll our eyes. Because Vince, if you cross him, he's going to get you.
Intro, was there any more from the board?
Yeah, I had one from Luddite Supreme. He wanted to know, what did you do whenever your students recognized you?
Great question. First of all, when I was still teaching, wrestling was more of a territory thing. And I was, 1985 is when we went national on Channel 9. Prior to that, I was on TV in Detroit. Most of the time I'd be the student. And they never saw wrestling from the Northeast or St. Louis or any place else. They only saw the Sheik's TV show. He was a promoter in Detroit. And when I was there, I was a student with a mask on. So they never really saw me. But some of those thinkers would move in from some towns where they'd see me. They'd come in and tell the kid, oh yeah, he's a wrestler. So they'd come up to me with magazines. I'm on the cover. They say, you're George Steele. You're George Hannibal Steele. You're the wrestler. They'd show me the picture. I'd say, yeah. Wow, do you really think I'm that ugly? What are they going to say? And then I'd look at him and say, well, yeah, maybe I look a little bit like him, but that's George Steele. I'm Coach Myers. Now they didn't know what to do. I didn't call him a liar. Do you really think I'm that ugly? I mean, come on. My name is Jim Myers. That's George Steele. And so the kids kind of knew it. It was kind of tongue-in-cheek. 1985. I'm the head football coach. I come back from a run in New York. In fact, it's my last run. This is when I quit coaching, as a matter of fact. I think it was 85. It might have been 84 the year before, but I think it was 85. We were undefeated that year. And I come back, and my coaching staff does all my pre-pad training. I had a great coaching staff. And then when I'd come in, it was time to put the pads on and hit. So it's a whole different level. You know what I'm talking about? Mm-hmm. And so I come in, and the kids are all lined up. And our first calisthenic that day was going to be, I called them jumping jacks. Some places they call it side straddle hops or whatever. So the kids, they would break down. They do their exercise and break down on a football position. 80 green tongues come out. I was caught. I didn't have a chance to say anything. They'd seen me on television because we went national, and they saw the green tongue, and I don't know how they got all their tongues green. I don't think they used fluorescence. They probably used now and later or some crazy thing. But I was trapped. I was caught. Can you tell I had a lot of fun in the business?
Yeah, I like that. I mean, you should enjoy what you're doing.
Hey, and I'll tell you something, and all kidding aside, I know some fans get hot when I become a cartoon character, but I love our fans. I really do. We had the most loyal fans in the world. With looking any sport, any event that you want, it can be the movies or whatever. Our fans, and sometimes they're just really screwed over kind of bad, but they're loyal, and they know more about the wrestling business sometimes than we do.
Mm-hmm. So I'm going to ask a couple more here from the Facebook before I let you go. Joe Bill Taylor wants to know, I always thought the flying hammerlock was a great move and looked vicious, but I've never seen anyone else do it. Was this a decision to use? What is the decision to use the move as your finisher, and why don't you think anyone else has used it since?
That's a good question. Do you remember Dan Spivey?
Oh yeah,
Golden Boy Dan Spivey.
Yep.
He was at the WCW one time, and they were trying to decide and have a guy who was going to use the flying hammerlock in their business. They had Ric Flair and all the greats there, and they were trying to show this guy how to do the flying hammerlock, and none of them knew how. Danny said, I watched him for a while. Then he said, I just laughed out loud and said, George Steele has one hole, and none of you can copy it. But the truth of the matter is, the flying hammerlock was a very dangerous move. It really was. I mean, the guy had to go along with me, but if he leaned forward, he would dislocate his shoulder. If he didn't lean back, he was going to get hurt bad. And if he leaned forward, I'd pitch him off because I didn't want to hurt him. Yeah. But it was the most vicious-looking hold. Most guys didn't have the balance, and that sounds egotistical again, or the strength to do what I did. It's a great strength. I mean, I did it at the 300-pounder. But you also had to lean your back a little bit. And you had to have great balance. You had to be an athlete. You couldn't do that just being a showman. You had to, and a lot of the guys were scared to death of it. And I would tell them, I'm not going to let you get hurt. I'm not going to let you get hurt. A couple of times people did lean forward and they did get hurt a little bit, but I tried to prevent it. But it's I think it was probably the most convincing, most vicious hold. Forget about moonsaults and everything. If just putting an actual hold on somebody and making it look devastating, that was it. I mean, figure four is pretty good, but and since no one, even the wrestlers couldn't figure it out, that's not bad.
Yeah, something to be proud of.
You know how I learned it? You know how I learned it?
No.
Crusher Cortez, I mentioned him earlier. When I first broke into business, was in Detroit, and he used to put the hammerlock on people and lift them in the air and throw them. So he never held them. And so as I was starting to do some things, he said, you should always work on one spot in the body and then beat him with that. And then he said, if you're doing a figure four and working on the legs, that means you're laying on the mat a lot. It's kind of boring. If you can do a hold on the arms or head or neck or something where you can be up and working, it's more attractive to the fans. So he showed me how to do that. Then at the end, you put a hammerlock on him, on the ground, and they submit. I did that a few times, and then I got the feel that I could maybe hold them up there, and I tried it, and I was able to, and that became what I think the most convincing vicious hold in the history of wrestling. Mm-hmm. I'm not talking about taking a bump off the top of the moonsault. I'm talking about a wrestling hold.
Yeah.
And I only used one.
You brought up, moonsaults and stuff a few times. What are your thoughts on the guys that do a lot of those moves? Do you think you could go back and get away, not do those kind of moves, or do you think wrestling is advanced that you still have? There's people that want to see that, and you're going to have to do some of that.
I'll tell you what. The way the wrestling business is today, starting out brand new, but knowing what I know, I probably couldn't make a dime doing what I did as a heel or a babyface, because they wouldn't give me the time on TV to get over with it.
Yeah.
So business-wise, it's changed. Probably couldn't do it. Probably wouldn't want to do it. I would never, never, never do anything in the ring that I thought was really going to hurt somebody. Mm-hmm. And I would never do anything in the ring that I thought was really, really going to hurt me.
Right.
So, no, I was never into the pain pills or all that stuff. I did drink a little bit. I always had a couple of shots before I went in the ring. Even I had to, just to loosen up a little bit. But no. In fact, God blessed me in such a way that it was the right time for me to come into business. I never watched wrestling. I wasn't a wrestling fan. And he took me along. I was able to feed my family and get my kids through college and have some great friends and great relationships with a lot of the guys. Some of them, I don't have, but that's fine. It's probably because I told them what I thought. Probably asked me. I never told them if they didn't ask.
Right.
And I'm happy with. I'm just. In fact, I'm writing a book, and it's crazy because I don't know how to write a book. I got a guy helping me, and it's going to be very honest and not exposing the business, because I think when people come out and some of the wrestlers, this is phony, they don't even know what they're talking about. It's not phony, it's not fake, it's real. It's real if you do it right. And those guys that are wrestling today that are flying around like monkeys, those are great athletes. I don't care what you say, they are great athletes. And if anyone wants to criticize any of the wrestlers from my era or the wrestlers now, all I say is try walking in our shoes. It wasn't easy. It wasn't easy. A lot of guys get into wrestling because they think it's not real. Those guys don't last very long because it is. I mean, it's tough. If you're doing it right, it's tough. I respect the heck out of the young guys today that are, the stars, the superstars of the WWE. I respect each and every one of them. The fans, whether they like what we did or not, I respect them. Like I said earlier, respect all, fear none.
I'm going to ask one more question here. This is actually about your movie career. Job's in the chat room. It's also one of my favorite movies. But I want to know, what was it like playing Tor Johnson and Ed Wood, and did you study Tor Johnson at all before the movie?
I think that's kind of funny, too. Tim Burton called me up and told me that he was looking for somebody to play this role of Tor Johnson, and every place he went, it come back to me. He didn't know if he wanted to use an actor or a wrestler, but everybody says George Steele looks just like him. He says, you look just like this movie star, and I'd like to meet you, and I'd like to use in this movie. And so he saw me, and he said, well, you're a little bit short, but they made some shoes that made me about 5 inches taller. So I stumbled around. They told me to talk funny, do my toes type thing. And so, I was doing all that. But he told me, he said, you look just like this movie star. So I told my wife, honey, I look like a movie star. You know what I mean? And then I researched the part, and I found out he was the first guy to do monster movies without makeup. I look like a movie star. I want to be a movie star. Crazy stuff. But you know what? It was fun. And when I got there, it was, you'd think you're going to be nervous. You're going on a set with Tim Burton and Johnny Depp and Bill Murray and all these superstars. I wasn't. It was just like, it was natural. It was like I'd been there before. So we're talking about it, and Bill Murray says, well, how does it feel, being in this business? I said, well, it feels like I've been here before. He looked at me and started laughing. He said, you have been. They called it a ring, but it's the same thing.
Yeah. Did you find a lot of the actors were wrestling fans and knew you from wrestling?
Bill Murray knew all about wrestling. He really did. Johnny Depp, not so much, but Johnny was just a great guy. Who's the guy that won the Academy? Martin Landau.
Martin Landau.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, he was just. These were just great people. When I went to the premiere, usually with actors, it's like the media's there and everybody's sucking up the media. Our premiere was in the Lincoln Center. It was more like a wedding with a bunch of family people. And we just had a great time. And I think it showed in the movie, but everybody really cared about it. I think the only one that didn't really fit in, and this is a knock on her, was Arquette.
Mm-hmm.
What's the other one? No, not Arquette. Patricia Arquette.
Sarah Jessica Parker.
Sarah Jessica Parker. She had her dog and stayed by herself over there. That it was fine too. Everybody has their own way.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
But it was a great time. It really was a great experience.
Yeah, because not only do we do the wrestling show, but we also do a horror movie show, and we've been going to a lot of horror movie conventions. Okay. And I've noticed that every time there's a wrestler there, the actors, they all seem like big fans of them.
That's right.
This kind of surprises me.
That's right.
Not really surprising me, but it's interesting.
Let me tell you something. I had a couple of kids, playing in the NFL, and I'd go to, when I was wrestling, sometimes I'd be in an area, and they'd invite me to their locker room while they were practicing. And a lot of them locker rooms had posters of all the superstars of the WWF all over the place back in the 80s. I'll never forget going into into San Diego, the Chargers. They probably had 12 different posters of different wrestlers, and Elizabeth, maybe two of her, all over the locker room. So, yeah, and meanwhile, Don Morocco and I went to a Pittsburgh Steelers workout, and they used to be down at this place called St. Mary's, and you had to walk down a hill, and and the fans were all up on top of the hill, and Don and I at the time were really top heels. I was still a vicious heel. And we're walking down this here thing, and all of a sudden the people started booing and raising hell. And we get close to the where the tackle, doing the tackling drill, and the coach looked up. He thought they were excited about the drill. He looked at us. He said, "Boy, these people love football, don't they?" one of the players looked over and said, "He don't get it." So Don and I went. They had a truck down there, with equipment and so on. We went and just kind of slid under the truck and hid there, so we were away from the fans. And we didn't want to interrupt, the practice they were having.
Mm-hmm.
So just respect everybody when you're in their house.
Yeah. Well, we want to really thank you for coming on.
What do you mean?
Really
this is 2 hours. I expect $100 an hour.
Oh.
Just kidding. In fact, I probably should tell the fans that an old timer like me, I've got to pay you $500 for every hour to be on the show.
No.
I don't have to pay
pleasure having you. No.
Oh, really?
You can come on anytime you like.
I'm just kidding.
Yeah.
I've enjoyed. Thank you very much. It's like a blast for the past for an old man. God bless you guys. And if anyone is interested, go to my website, georgetheanimalsteel.com. I'm not trying to sell anything, but you can find out about my faith, my deal with Crohn's disease. A lot of old matches on there that you can video of old matches, and some of the commercials that I've done, and my testimony with the Lord, and just a lot of different things that might surprise you. Hey, you know what I mean? Bye-bye.
And we'll put the link right up on the website.
I appreciate that.
Yeah, no problem.
God bless.
Hello,